Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen who wanted a child more than any treasure in the world. But when a prince was at last born to the aging couple, they learned that his fate would be to protect all weak things, even at the cost of his life. The king and queen mourned, for with such a fate their prince would come to know nothing but sorrow and pain. And so, thinking to save him from grief and bequeath him nothing but unending happiness, they banished all shadows from their kingdoms. Ah, peace forever, they sighed, watching despair and anger and darkness fly out from the prince's heart, from their hearts, from the hearts of all their subjects, in the forms of ravens. But where will they fly to? The king and queen wondered before forgetting the question in the shining smile of their son, his heart now untouched and pure as freshly fallen snow. But did the monster raven, so entirely evil, come out from the prince's heart? Or did the prince, so impossibly pure, come out from the ravens? Fakir set the well-worn down book in his lap and with a sigh, leaning back as much as he could in the hard wooden hospital chair beside Duck's bed. It was the same book Charon had read to Fakir countless times when he had been a child. The same book Fakir himself had read to the heartless Mythos countless times. The same book he had turned to in hopes of finding an answer when he realized he had somehow been caught in the thrall of Drosselmeyer's story all along, only to discover it never had an ending at all. Somehow, none of them had noticed. He spent so much time desperately searching for endings, then, that he never given much thought to the beginning of the prince and the raven. Long before the prince shattered his heart to steal the raven, his heart had been shattered, and a raven as evil as the prince was noble and pure had flown from it. It was an absurd sort of question that the story posed, and now knowing something of Drosselmeyer's twisted sense of humor firsthand, very much in keeping with the taste of the writer, was the prince a part of the raven, or the raven a part of the prince? In a way, it hardly mattered. They were different faces of the same coin, and so vied for mastery. The raven wanting nothing more than to devour the prince, and when that failed, to change him into a prince who would love a raven, a prince who was a raven. In the end, the raven himself was devoured in the warm red glow that emanated from the prince's sword, a flash of red light that glowed like the prince's own heart. But what of those ravens? What of that prince now? As if summoned by this thought, Mythos quietly entered the hospital room, a stack of books in his arms. I thought I would bring you some of the books you wanted to check before Rue and I continued our search. Fakir had been reluctant to leave Duck by herself, even though she only woke him frequently, and would not notice his absence, as if once out of his sight she might vanish. And at last Mythos had decided that he and Rue would search the town for more statues and ravens, while Fakir worked to learn just what was afoot. Any luck in uncovering what we're facing? Fakir rose, taking the books from Mythos and setting them carefully on the floor beside his chair. He motioned the other boy to follow him in the corridor, just outside the room, so their conversation would not disturb the sleeping Duck. Mythos, you said you sensed a raven, and that is why you returned to Gold Crown. What did you mean by it? Even in my kingdom, I could feel the poison stirring, a darkness in the air, the recklessness of raven's blood. Ever since we returned to my kingdom, I have felt the pull of the raven within me, a shadow over my heart. I tried to suppress it as best as I could, to bury those dark emotions. But it grew stronger, and after a time I realized it was starting to call me, not from within myself, or within the kingdom, from without. So, there was something awakening in Gold Crown Town that felt familiar to you? As familiar as this raven's blood that now flows in my veins. Mythos closed his eyes momentarily, as if in pain. When I feared you were the raven, and raised my sword against you, when you were in despair and begged me to raise my sword against you, I was torn, not knowing if my desires were my own, or for the raven's blood within me. Once I knew, without thinking, Mythos continued wistfully, what I should do, protect the weak, even when it endangered my own well-being. Even when I was heartless, I knew this to the marrow of my bones, but now I am never certain what it means to protect the weak. If what I do does in fact protect the weak, the raven in me now has me riddled with doubt. I've been reading The Prince and the Raven again. Fakir said in a gentle voice. Mythos. I think the raven was always supposed to be a part of your heart. That the story itself was set into motion because the raven was torn out of it. Mythos stared at his most loyal knight, his eyes haunted. This darkness, then, he asked in an undertone, has always been my own. There was no response that Fakir could think of that would be adequate in the face of Mythos's pain, and so he merely clasped his prince's shoulder with a hand. It was an agony that Fakir had learned all too well himself. The darkest night was as much part of him as the raven was a part of Mythos. A moment, and then Mythos seemed to visibly pull himself together. Given the large number of statues Rue had already discovered, there was no time to indulge his own personal grief. In the fledgling ravens? I think they're also from the fairy tale. What they're doing in the hearts of the townspeople, I don't know. But we have to find a way to return them. That's all I know with certainty so far. Fakir sighed, rubbing his weary eyes and refusing to think about how desperately he wanted to sleep. How much he wished to never see another book again after it felt like endless, fruitless hours of searching them. And now it was Mythos' turn to clasp Fakir's shoulder. I have full faith in you as my knight. We'll find a way, Fakir agreed grimly. He glanced back into Doug's hospital room, watching her sleep peacefully. He would not lose her again. We would have to. Then, almost against his own will, he inquired, has she cooled down any? Give Rue time. She is very protective of those she cared for. Fakir did not see the faint smile on Mythos' lips. A little like you. Fakir scowled. It doesn't matter to me, but it bothers Doug. And so it matters to you after all. Mythos smiled again. Give her time. I had best return to our search. Fakir merely smiled again. It had been a mess the day before. Things had begun normally enough, or as normally as they could, given the situation. Mythos had rushed Rue to the hospital. At first, she had still been too stunned by what she had seen happen to Artur to inquire. But when she had roused herself from her shock to ask why Duck was in the hospital, Mythos insisted they had more pressing matters to discuss first. Duck had smiled reassuringly at Rue as he leaned back into the pillows that propped her up, but that hardly eased Rue's concern. She perched on the bed beside the smaller girl, worrying, lying her face as she looked at Duck while Mythos explained what he had found by the lakeside. Not only had fledgling raven had he expected, but the statue of a girl in the place of a living, breathing one. And Rue, who had unearthed the greatest part of the mystery, explained not only what she and Artur had discovered, but about the defacement of the manuscript itself. He was not sure how it would work, but Artur theorized that the gaps, lacunae they called them, created in the story were enacted by the most convenient players from the story itself. So, I became a puppet in my own story. Fakir had uttered in terms of self-disgust, pacing along the room in his agitation. The bastard! Surely the story has wreaked more than enough vengeance on him, Mythos suggested quietly. There has to be a way to turn all of them human again, doesn't there? Duck asked, worry of fatigue clear in her voice. The only thing that kept Fakir from suggesting that she rest was the certain knowledge that she would refuse. The ensuing quarrel would only sap her strength further. First, we need to learn just who is being affected and why. So far we know of Artur, the bookman, and that girl Mythos found. Rue counted her fingers on her fingers. And what, if anything, this might all have to do with those thankless feathered nuisances I've been taking care of in your absence, Duck. Fakir had spoken then, uncharacteristically hesitant. I don't think I created them. I think the ravens were already in the townfolks, my victims. He amended with self-loathing, hearts. But I can't think that they belong there. Mythos frowned and thought, when I found Charon, the fledgling raven with him was like a burden too heavy for him to bear. A despair not his own. Still, I don't think they mean any harm. Duck had nodded her agreement with that, and Rue, after a day in the company of the birds, had to agree as well. I don't think that the statues and the birds, are related, or at least not directly. Fakir reasoned. There were no ravens with the bookman's or with Arthur? He asked, and when Rue nodded, he continued, there may still be ravens trapped in their hearts, but the absence suggests that the birds don't have anything to do with them turning to stone. Under that point, the conversation had started to go in circles, and Duck, unable to keep her eyes open any longer, had dozed slightly, drifting in and out of their talk as they covered the same ground, unable to progress further without more information. All they could do for now, they realized in the end, was Kellogg, who had turned to stone, and get as many of the fledgling ravens he could find, and see if anything in the library would shed more light on the situation. It was then that Rue, whose concern had been mounting for some time now, as he learned just how weak and uninjured Duck was, had demanded in an angry whisper, not wanting to wake the other girl. "Now, will one of you just tell me what is going on? Why is Duck in the hospital?" A silence that stretched too long, and then Mythos and Fakir spoke at once. It was an accident. Mythos insisted, even as Fakir confessed in a muscleless voice, "It's because of me. It's my fault." Rue pursed her lips. "It's one or the other." She had snapped back when no explanations followed, her gaze already hardening as she considered Fakir's words. Before Fakir, in the throes of his guilt, could make matters worse by telling as unflattering a tale as possible, Mythos set forth as neutral an account of the events as he could. Mythos had barely finished before Rue was on her feet. "You! Keep your voice down!" Fakir spat out quietly. "Or do you want to wake her?" "Both of you calm down." Mythos tried to interject. "We don't have time for this now. I will go look for more statues, and Rue can stay and take care of the ravens." At that point, her patience, a thread frayed by worry for Duck, for Mythos, for them all to the point of breaking, Rue had rounded on Mythos. "Do you have any idea how furious I am with you for the way you keep going to danger alone since we have returned here, leaving me behind to worry and wait? But that is a conversation we will have in more detail later," she promised. She was filled with anger so cleansing that all fears showing the ugliness of her heart to Mythos had been burned away. The anger he would keep from her to keep him safe entirely surpassed the fear he would reject her when he learned just what a dark, flawed princess he had chosen. "Be certain I am going with you this time, and we can both check in on the ravens as we need to." Mythos was taken aback, seeing a fire in Rue's eyes he hadn't realized had been missing until then, and then wondered how he could not possibly notice. Without it, she was only half alive. It was as if she had worked so hard to erase the memory of Princess Creating from his mind, by becoming her exact opposite, while they dwelt in the fairy tale kingdom that, in a way, had begun to lose sight of all Rue truly was. She would not budge on this, he realized, and that Rue knew he would not give an inch. "They will search the town together," Mythos had agreed slowly, still caught off guard, not by the display of Rue's temper, but by how he had failed to notice that something had been amiss with her until this moment, while you, Fakir, stay here with Tutu, and see if you can find anything that will help us in the library. "I'm not leaving her alone with him!" Rue had whispered fiercely, looking over at Duck, whose face was still unnaturally pale under her tan. "Not after what he's done to her!" And that was when things had really fallen apart. Already a mass of seething guilt, remorse, and self-loathing, Fakir had lashed out. "And just what did you do to her as Karehi? To Mythos? Fakir!" The sharpness of Mythos' raised voice had woken Duck, and taking an intense scene before her with startled eyes. Mythos' rebuke had startled Fakir. He had never before heard that tone from the prince before. It had once filled him with shame, and he smoldered, full of unspoken apologies, not for Rue, but for Mythos. Yet the same did not dissipate the anger. He seized with fury, directed against himself, directed against Rue. What's wrong?" Duck asked, a little blearily. "Duck," Rue said, taking the other girl's hands in her own. "I'm worried about you. I heard what happened by the lake. I want you to feel safe, to be safe. I don't think it's a good idea to leave you here with Fakir," she added grudgingly, "even if it was an accident." Duck smiled at the older girl's troubled eyes. "I'm glad you're worried about me, Rue. Well, I'm not glad that you're worried, but, Duck rambled in her usual way. "Anyway, what I mean is, it'll be okay. I trust Fakir." The furrow of anxiety creased in Rue's brow remained. "Why?" "Because he's Fakir," Duck answered, slightly red-faced, but looking Rue in the eye, had continued softly, "Because I love him." Rue had sat back stunned at that, and while Mythos begun to suspect the direction of Fakir's feelings over the past few days, he too had been taken by surprise. For his part, Fakir had just been stunned, although Duck had admitted as much to him the day before. The anger that Mythos' rebuke had not been able to quell evaporated, replaced by an embarrassment he could not hope to speak through. I see, Rue responded at last as she rose from Duck's side, still unsure what to think. Part of Rue had wanted to point out that there was no logic to that at all, but she didn't have the heart to do it. Not when she knew what Duck really meant. She herself had loved Mythos just as truly as he had been cruel and vicious, tainted with Raven's blood. And Mythos had loved her, even though she had been the one to do that to him. Rue couldn't help but admit, if only to herself, the true and Fakir's stinging words. They had, both of them, hurt the people they loved, and so perhaps it was not her place to judge him. But Duck was her first friend, her dearest friend, and so even as she stalked out the room, the Raven Princess had promised Fakir, "If you hurt her again, I'll make you pay." Fakir wondered a little sardonically if he could make a similar promise to her. Fakir returned to the chair beside Duck's bed. Once again, he remembered the look of anger mixed with betrayal in Mythos' voice. Fakir had last out Rue. It was not a moment he was proud of. "You keep frowning like that, your eyebrows will get stuck together," Duck teased, her voice rough from sleep. He couldn't smile softly at that, able to forget his guilt about the argument, even all the dilemmas surrounding them in that moment with her. "I'll see a nurse about getting a meal for you," he said as he helped her sit up. Fakir had discovered to his surprise, over the past few days, that Duck made a terrible invalid. She complained about the bland food, resisted help at every turn, and insisted she was well enough to leave, even when it was clear she wasn't. Her very first meal, when Fakir had to help feed her, had been a disaster. So utility scowled and pouted, telling him how he could manage on her own, even as lifting her arm tired her. At last, an exasperated Fakir had thrown the spoon down and angrily proclaimed, "Have you ever been sick before? Now stop making faces and just let me take care of you!" She muttered something under her breath. "What was that?" he growled, utterly at the end of his patience. And that had triggered Duck's own temper. "I said, no, I've never been sick. Not as a girl, and I don't think as a duck. And besides, other ducks don't take care of you like that. So I'm sorry if I'm not doing anything wrong, but I don't want to be a burden for you. This makes me feel completely stupid to not be able to do anything for myself, and I'm tired all the time and hurt all over, so just leave me alone." "You're on," Fakir said. "Was it somehow supposed to be neat? You could never be a burden to me, idiot." He had for good measure. Not sure he was insulting her or himself anymore. Both, probably. Then sat down and picked up the spoon, gargling until Duck opened her mouth resentfully, a scowl on her own face. He had not been able to stop but laugh at her expression. As he sat down to tray of soup, soft bread and cheese, even though she was now truly well enough to feed herself, Fakir couldn't resist teasing Duck a little by holding out a spoonful of soup before her. She glared. "I think you're even worse at being sick than I am. And when that happens, I'll be there to rub it in your face." He would never admit it, and wondered as own irrationally as he thought. But a part of him was looking forward to seeing that too. He ate in silence for a few moments, and he turned once more to the perpetual stack of books beside him, listening for Artur's help even as he cursed the other boy's name. Although he knew full well that no matter how much he cursed Artur, all the blame for what transpired lay squarely on his own shoulders. It had been Artur who wielded his sword against Mythos, who had hurt Duck or Charon or the others, but Fakir himself. "Do you think," Duck mused with a mouthful of bread, "that Princess Tutu might be able to do anything about this?" Fakir looked up from the book in his lap as he considered Duck's question. "We don't even know if this new pendant has the power to transform you into Princess Tutu. But in any case, it doesn't matter," he added repressively. "You're in no shape to be going dancing." "But maybe as Tutu I can help the people turn to stone." "No." "But Fakir—" "Your health matters more." "You're one to talk." "I'm not the one in the hospital bed." "You will be soon if you keep this up," Duck snapped back, anger clear in her voice. "When was the last time you slept? You look like you're going to collapse. How will that help anyone?" They glared at each other, at an impasse until Fakir sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You may have a point there, but we're so pressed for time." Yet he had gone so long without resting that merely suggesting a sleep was too great a temptation to resist. The words had started to blur again before his eyes, and he found himself reading the same sentences over and over before being able to understand them. Maybe this useless book will actually make sense after a little rest. He admitted reluctantly, setting the book down and pillowing his head on his arms on the side of her bed. Doug Watson's intense line of his shoulders gradually relaxed. His breathing became soft and even, as he knew he had fallen asleep. Felt relieved to see him resting at last. She knew Fakir blamed himself for the situation they were in now, and was pushing himself to his limits to find a solution, even though they were all in this together. He was trying to shoulder the burden on his own. A gentle knock on the door roused Duck from her thoughts. She looked up to find Mythos. He had another stack of books in his arms. "Where's Rue?" Duck whispered, gesturing to the sleeping Fakir to indicate to keep their voices down. "She's feeding the fledgling ravens." He set the stack down quietly and picked up a blanket lying at the foot of Duck's bed. As Mythos draped it over Fakir's shoulders, he murmured, "He drives himself too harshly." "I don't think he really believes we're in this together. He doesn't need to do everything alone," she sighed. "Mythos," Duck asked, her eyes on Fakir's haggard face, "do you think you can help me to the lake? I want to see if there's anything I could do for Pink." As he'd been anyone but Princess Tutu, Mythos would have hesitated. It was only for a handful of days since he had been so seriously injured, but seeing the earnest concern, determination on her expression, he acquiesced. Mythos began to doubt the wisdom of the plan as he helped Duck to the lakeside, her arms slung across his shoulders. He was supporting much of her weight, but seemed foolish to turn back now. Duck felt exhausted with each step, as if the grim, overcast sky was pressing down on her. When at last she caught sight of Peak, a marble statue leaning against the tree Duck had left her by, she got a little cry of distress. "Oh, Pink!" She couldn't bear to see Peak like this. Duck stepped away from Mythos' supporting shoulder, reaching out her arms to her friend's, light sparkling in the pendant about her neck. Her heart's blood within the stone answering the call of her heart. She felt warmth build up in her, giving her strength, washing away the weariness in her limbs. And suddenly she was Princess Tutu, the princess she had called out from within her own heart. The bird-like princess who had wings in place of arms, and possessed enough hope to lighten the darkest despair. She danced, reaching out to the girl who was frozen in stone, with feathered arms, hoping to call out to her heart. "Who are you?" Pete's scared voice whispered in Tutu's mind, although the expression on the statue's face stayed set in stone and unmoving. "It's dark and lonely in here. Pink, where are you?" And suddenly Princess Tutu found herself in a void, all blackness and emptiness, with Peak huddled and miserable in the center of it. "What's wrong?" Princess Tutu asked her gently. "I can't move," Peak cried at her knees. "I don't know how to go on." Tutu rested the tips of her wings on Peak's shoulders and helped the other girl rise, leading her to a pirouette. "I can't remember who I am," the pink-haired girl confessed, as she and Tutu spun about each other. "There's so many things, so many people I can't remember. Now I'm trapped. I can't move forward." "It hurts, doesn't it?" Tutu answered. "Not remembering your past, knowing you've forgotten people you loved and all the things you experienced together. But all the memories, they're right there in your heart." Tutu brought her winged arms up to her own heart, and remembered how the oak tree had awakened the memories so deeply asleep within herself that she could not have reached them alone. "Remember," she implored Peak, and the egg-shaped pendant glowing richer red when Doug's wish flared, the light surrounding them both. "You're a girl who loves ballet, a good friend, and so much more." Memories washed around Peak of herself and the two girls sitting by a fountain laughing happily, of afternoons spent reading romance novels secretly, of dreams of a dark handsome prince who would sweep her off her feet, of a practice room, and the same two girls, for being scolded by a feline instructor, of a raven prince who reached out to her and told her to love only him, a town full of ravens, of a princess glowing with hope who had saved them all. All the memories she had lost since the story had ended returned to her. Half of them seemed fantastical dreams to her, but they were fancies, they were all her own, and she grasped them, desperately not wanting to lose them again. Peak looked up to find a large white swan before her, brightening the void that surrounded her. She stepped towards the bird, and it guided her out of darkness. As he watched Tutu fall to her knees with weariness, the awareness of her human frailty struck Mythos like a blow. When he, heartless and hopeless, had first met Tutu, he could do nothing but worry about her with each returned heart shard, because he was such a fragile hope, the first he had seen in so long. But as the raven's blood saturated his own, she had taken more and more of a form of an unyielding enemy, one he could not destroy. In that final battle against the raven, the power of her hope had outshone the morality of her body. He had not been able to think of her any other way. He had not realized that until this moment he still thought of her as the magical princess whose hope could nothing extinguish. As he was still at that, still a magical princess of infinite hope, but human and vulnerable. He caught her before she could fall. I, I'm all right, Duck breathed, her transformation undoing herself. How's Pink? She looks to be asleep, but entirely human once more. He assured her, I will return for her after helping you to the hospital. He promised as he carried her back into town. Mythos looked down at the unconscious girl in his arms, her face lined with pain and exhaustion. I relied on you so heavily for so long. I've forgotten you're much more than a princess who will come to aid me when I'm in need. Forgive me, Tutu. Duck. Only in this book can that be dramatic!